Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today I have a mid-month wrap-up for you, purely by chance. I was just going to do a weekly reading wrap-up because I haven't been vlogging and I have some books I really want to talk about. But instead it's April 14th when I'm filming this, so you get this mid-month wrap-up. So let's go ahead and talk about the books I've read so far. I have read 1, 2, 3, 4. I've read 5 books in the month of April so far. We're just going to get right into it. So the first book that I read is The Design of Dukes by Kathleen Ayers. So this is an author that was last, I think November or December, I made a video about historical romance authors that I wanted to try, and this author popped up on there. Like, she was on my radar earlier last year. One of you sent me one of her books that I had on my wish list, which I haven't read yet, but I definitely will. And I really was excited to get to this author. So I picked up this second book because Jesson had read the first and she didn't really love it, and so I just thought, you know, we'll go into book 2. A lot of times the second book is typically better, especially if it's like a beginning series. So I went into this with hopeful expectations and I was pretty disappointed. I ended up giving this 2 stars. And I give it a 2-star, not necessarily because there's anything that is absolutely terrible about it, but a 2-star book for me is a book that I really didn't enjoy reading it at all. Like, there was no enjoyment in this book for me. And I powered through to the end because I wanted to see it through. I wanted to see if maybe she could change my mind on this couple, and it just never happened. So this is about a family who is kind of disgraced, as historical romance family, and the hero, you know, he's got daddy issues, as is typical for dukes in historical romance, and he is determined, like, he's absolutely not going to fall for or be attached to a woman who has such a bad name, bad reputation, and also is of questionable birth. So, but they end up meeting at a party, the hero and heroine. The heroine wants to be a fashion designer, like a barista, no, not a barista. What is the word for, I can't think of the word. Modiste. I'm tired, okay? It's been a long day. And she wants to be like a dress designer, and I really liked that aspect of her personality, that part of her character, how she wanted to be a designer and make gowns and dresses, and she didn't seem to be just only focusing on getting married, which I thought was pretty fresh and unique. So the hero and the heroine, they meet at this ball, and they both have like bad feelings towards one another. So it's definitely set up to be an enemies to lovers, but I never really got a good grasp on the reasons why they were supposed to be enemies, other than they just didn't like each other. But then they also had this just like scorching attraction that was told to us and never really shown to us, because even if you give me a setup where I don't really understand why they're enemies, but you get the chemistry right so I can feel this attraction between them, then I can get on board with that more easily. But I just really didn't feel any sort of chemistry or attraction in here. It felt very hollow. I don't know. So they have this attraction, they have a kiss, time separates them, they end up thrown back together. And honestly, this book was just extremely forgettable. The writing was serviceable. There was nothing that was like necessarily catching my eye to make me like stumble my reading experience, you know, but it was also not anything that was like stellar, so that's good. I mean, serviceable writing, I think that's fantastic. Honestly, as long as it's a good vehicle, a clear vehicle to get you the story, I'm happy, you know. But alas, that's pretty much the only good point of this. I felt like the heroine was pretty well developed. The hero was not at all. He was a very stereotypical duke with daddy issues, you know, can't be bothered to fall in love with someone who has all these strikes against her, which I understand, but it's just tired, you know, it's just very tired. And literally, I don't understand why they fell in love. It just sort of seemed like they said, oh, we're in love, when all we saw between them was this just desire, lust. This was a purely lust-based romance, and I absolutely hate those. I hate them so much that I feel like that was such a focus of the relationship. It was the only thing about them that they liked about the other one, was how attractive they were, how much they thought about doing this. And also, this is another book where the hero, every time we're in his head, he is thinking about what the woman's going to do to him with her mouth or with that. And I just don't like that. I find that distasteful. It's really hard for me to get on board with a hero like that when that is literally a continuous loop in his head and nothing else. You know, he's not even talking about how beautiful she is. He's just like, that mouth. No, gross, yuck, ugh, I hate it so bad. So the combination of flat characters, literally a very boring plot where nothing was really happening plot-wise, no romance to speak of other than lust, just 2 stars. I was disappointed I didn't like it. So, okay, the next book that I read is an ARC, and it was one of my favorite books of the year. It is The Coldest Winter by Brittany Cherry. Now, I love Brittany Cherry. She actually was one of the first romance authors that I really deep dived into, indie romance authors, when I was getting back into reading romance, and I read all of her, the Gravity series, I can't remember, the Element series, I think. I've read so many of her books, and I just love and adore her books so much. I think she is an author that I trust to take me through some emotional damage and bring me out feeling hopeful on the other side, and that's exactly what happened here. I love this book. I gave it 5 stars. This is a contemporary romance between a heroine and our hero. She's actually a student teacher. He is a student in high school, but he's 19. He was held back for reasons, and so there's a tiny bit of an age gap there, and I do enjoy an older woman romance. I think it's very fun. We don't get them very often, and I like them a lot, and I felt like the setup here for it was really, really great. So the book begins when our heroine, she's on paper, she's got her life on track. She's lost her mother in her past, and she's really trying to just sort of force herself to be happy by meeting all of these goals that she thinks her mom would want her to meet. And so she's got this boyfriend, and she thinks he's going to propose to her. So she goes over to his house, and she catches him, getting a blowjob by another girl, and she's obviously devastated, and she runs out and breaks up with him. And her roommate, her friend, is like, you know what you need? You need to go find a hot guy and have a one-night stand. And so she does. This is completely out of character, but she's going with it. And that's when she meets Milo, our hero. They have a one-night stand. It's very passionate. They also have this connection, and it's just, you can feel it so well, and I just loved it so much. And then they separate, and that's when they think, okay, that's it. That's all that we're going to have happen is just this one-night stand, and that's it. And then, of course, she ends up being his student teacher. So, of course, she shows up to be his student teacher. Milo also has lost his mother much more recently than Starlet. Starlet is the heroine's name. And he's very much struggling with his grief. This book has heavy themes of grief, really struggling with the loss of a mother specifically. And it also has content warnings for substance abuse and I can't remember all the content warnings, but it's going to be heavy at times. But the thing that I really love about Brittany Cherry, and something I think she did really, really well here, is she balances those really well. So it's not just entirely heavy, really sort of making you feel the grief all the time. You do feel it, and I think that is necessary specifically in this story because you get the contrast of that feeling of grief also while you are experiencing the joy of falling in love for the first time. So I thought that was beautifully done here. I loved these characters. I thought they were so well fleshed out. I felt like their romance was so sweet and tender and emotional. And, I've said a lot how I'm looking for romances that are more emotion driven rather than just smut and spice and lust, like I was talking about the previous book. And this book, maybe especially because I came off of the heels of a book that was so lust driven, but this book just was perfect for me. I loved it so much. I could feel their connection. I could feel their love and their romance. Just everything about this just worked for me. I found it beautiful and I loved it. So 5 stars for this one for sure. Okay, now the next book is one I'm not going to go into too much detail about what it's about, but it is The Ashes and the Star-Cursed King by Carissa Broadbent. I felt very lucky that I was able to get an ARC, and I read this, and I loved it so much. So I love Carissa Broadbent. I think that, truthfully, I think she is probably the best fantasy romance author writing right now. I don't know of anybody who comes close to her. I think she does such a good job of balancing romance and those emotions that really work in a romance, specifically interconnected to the fantasy world. That's something that worked so well here. They have all of these constraints in their relationship, this element of they want to be together but they can't, and a lot of what is keeping them apart are elements of the fantasy world and the political climate of what's going on with the kingdoms, and it's just so good. I loved this book. If you liked book 1, and what you liked about book 1 was the very fast-paced action games type of it, you may be a little disappointed, because I feel like this book has more of a slower building pace, because we're sort of unraveling mysteries of what the kingdoms have done and what is going on with her father that happened in the first book and who she really is. We're finding out a lot of mysteries, things that were mentioned earlier, and I think Carissa does that really, really well. But if you're looking for something that has the breakneck pace with less character development like the first book did, I don't think you're going to get that here. But you are still in this world with these characters, and I just loved it. I'm a character-driven reader, and I felt like this book was very much leveled up from book 1, and I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. I thought it was fantastic. Just so happy to have gotten a chance to read this early, but just so happy to have found this author. I think she's just amazing. So 5 stars for that one. Okay, so now the next book that I want to talk about is a YA book, and it is Muse of Nightmares by Laini Taylor. So I love and adore Laini Taylor, and I've been talking about her for kind of forever, I feel like. And this book specifically is one that I've kind of been holding off. I bought this as soon as it came out. I bought the audio, I bought the hardcover, and then I bought the paperback, and it just sat on my shelves, because the ending of book 1 destroyed me so much. I was like, what's she gonna do now? Because this isn't a romance, and the ending of book 1 really makes you feel like this is irreparable, but if you've read her previous series, maybe it's not. I know I'm being vague. If you've read them, you know what I'm talking about. So I was really nervous about going into this book, but I was just so pleasantly surprised with how this book ended. I gave it 5 stars. We're continuing on in the story of this magical land Weep and the God-spawned children and Laszlo and all of the things that he discovered at the end of book 1. I feel like I can't describe any of the plot of this book without giving away spoilers for book 1, but I will say this is magical fantasy at its best. This is such creative, unique fantasy, absolutely beautiful writing, moments in here that make your heart break, but that also leave you feeling hopeful in the end. And also, I think that the villain in here, who you feel like is the villain at the end of book 1, you really get to understand her and feel sympathetic with her and actually feel a lot of love and concern for her. So I really enjoyed that backstory. I loved how this was connected to Daughter of Smoke and Bone. I just loved it, so I gave it 5 stars, and I'm so happy about that, because I was very disappointed in the ending of the Daughter of Smoke and Bone trilogy, and I was hopeful this would be better, and for me it really was. So 5 stars for this one. Loved it. So that's 3 5 stars in a row. So now let's talk about the book that is not a 5 star, but maybe it's not quite as bad as bad as you think. So the last book I'm going to talk about is The Summer We Fell by Elizabeth O'Rourke. So this is a contemporary romance. This is her newest book. I've read a ton of Elizabeth O'Rourke, and there are some of her books that I have really, really loved, but her 2 most recent releases, other than this one, I've absolutely hated and given 2 stars. I felt like they were such a step down from what this author is capable of. So for me, I feel like this book really, truly showed me this is the Elizabeth O'Rourke that I am here for, meaning she deals with a lot of complicated subjects and topics, and she handles them with a lot of subtlety and nuance, and I really, really like that. And I felt like we got that again here, with a few caveats. So the basic premise of this book is we have our heroine who came from a very abusive home as a kid. She ends up getting rescued by this pastor and his family, and ends up falling in love with his son, or having a relationship with his son as a teenager. So the timeline in this book is you have the past, where she's a teenager and everything that's happening to her there, and then in the future, when we know there's some element, something has gone very wrong in the future, and we're trying to figure out what has happened to the people in her life, specifically one person, what happened to him. And we don't really find that out until the very end of the book. So I gave this book, I'm very conflicted. I literally finished listening to the audio just a few hours ago, and there were parts of this book that were 5 star for me in terms of writing and subtlety and dealing with heavy concepts, but dealing with them in a way that really I felt gave them the proper weight that they needed, and also how that was integrated into our character's personality. I really loved that. But there was also parts of this book that I just felt like this is a 3-star book at best, So I did have a few issues with this book. One of them specifically is we don't really ever see any romantic development, in the future at least, between her and the love interest Luke. There is a love triangle element in here, and I think it's pretty clear that the boy that she, is in a relationship with as a teenager, it's pretty clear that he's not meant for her, He's not a bad guy, And this is where I think this book gets into some potentially triggering content, because I firmly believe that this author either has or was going through some sort of religious deconstruction when she was writing this, because that is a huge theme of this book, is the people in the church, in this religion, in this faith, whatever, I'm not entirely sure what it is. You know, she's constantly, the author, through the main character, the heroine, is constantly talking about how these people are only doing this for show. She's really showing the worst parts of a religious community, the worst type of people. And I've been a part of a religious community for a very long time, and, you know, it's been 50-50, but there have been some really beautiful moments, and there's been some really terrible moments too. And I think what happened in this book is we only see the people who are stereotypical, terrible Christians or people of faith, you know, and I don't like that at all. There's a lot of negativity directed towards the church, and that's brought up again and again and again. So when I say this author typically handles things with a lot of subtlety really well, I would say that except for her talk about the church and how the church and purity culture specifically, big issue in here. If you are sensitive to purity culture talk at all, like deconstructing, I would be wary about this, because it's very heavy. It's very heavy. It's a very big theme about this book, and I don't feel like it was ever really given the care that I think it should have, you know? So again, that's gonna, you know, if you are somebody who hasn't had religion in your life, and that may not affect you, but if you have, and you've had any type of conflicted feelings, positive, negative, or whatever, I think this book is going to be a bit of a minefield, because it is heavy on the themes of deconstructing your religion and purity culture. But all of that being said, it's not a perfect book. The romance needed more development in the future. I didn't love how she handled specifically Danny, the boyfriend. Like, he is such a stereotypical man who's raised in the patriarchy, who believes that, you know, his word is law, his pleasure is the only thing that matters, and that he is just this special boy who's raised up to be a leader, like, stereotypical in that way. And that's one aspect of her writing that wasn't nuanced at all. So there wasn't really no point in feeling like it's a love triangle, because it's so clear that this guy is terrible. All he wants to do is clip her wings. He wants her to be subservient, to be stay-at-home mama and wife. And look, I've been a stay-at-home mom and wife, and I loved it. So maybe I am a little sensitive when people are in particularly degrading about that, you know? But I don't know. That's not, like, I say that, but that's not a huge theme of the book, but it was mentioned a few times, and I like how the author did say, well, it should be the woman's choice. Absolutely, it should be. It should be the heroine's choice, for sure. Anyway, I think this book had a lot of issues, but I also feel like it was pretty strong. You know, I really was invested in this story. This was a book that I kind of couldn't stop listening to, which has been rare for me lately. And I think one of the things that kept me just so fascinated was, what happened to Danny? What happened to him? You don't find out until the very end. So that little element of mystery was very effective in this book. Is this an effective or swoony romance? At times. And that's again why I feel like I was just talking to Cheyenne very briefly about this, because I posted in my Instagram stories that I had read it. She's like, did you like it? And we were talking back and forth, and I'm like, I kind of hesitate to even call it a romance, because it feels like it's so focused on the heroine's journey. And the romance obviously is a huge part of that, and that's where we get into, like, nitpicking, right? Is it a romance? Is it not? Because, you know, sometimes I swing the other way when it does take a big portion of the heroine or the hero's journey. But is the romance the central driving force of the story in this book? I think that's questionable. I feel like that's pretty questionable. Would this be a successful book without her romance to the man she ends up with in the end? I think it would. I think there's a point in here where you feel like if she didn't end up with this guy, she could still be happy. So by that definition, is it a romance? I kind of don't think so. So I don't know. All of that to say, I'm picking it apart, talking about the parts I didn't like. I gave this book 4 stars. It's not going to be a favorite romance of mine. I don't think it's particularly swoony, but it does do what I love Elizabeth O'Rourke to do, and that is really break our characters down, get into who they are and what's happened to them, and deal with their trauma. I just love books like that, and I think she did that really, really well. So it wasn't a slam dunk for me. It definitely has its problems, but I still enjoyed reading it. I don't feel like it's a very effective romance, personally. I mean, even the guy that she ends up with, the hero, he also is very stereotypical. You know, he's going to punch everybody who does anything wrong to her, which, don't get me wrong, I love that. But Every time, dude? Every time? Come on now. Come on now. How am I supposed to believe that this is a very intelligent, strong man that is a good balance with the heroine when he just goes caveman all the time? Like, caveman some of the time, yes, please. All the time? No. Okay, those are the books that I read for the first part of April. Hope you all enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next one.